welcome to Sex Talk with Natasha. I am currently on spring break in the middle of kind of nowhere, Arizona. I didn't know Arizona had mountains. I didn't know Arizona had woods. So I'm kind of in that space. And so my internet connection, I have one internet connection that's good, but not two. So I can't do what I'm normally doing at home. And so, so thanks for bearing with us with internet issues. One thing I just wanted to mention just really quickly before we get started, Sex Talk with Natasha is kind of a general program for anyone who's interested in healthy sexuality, sexual health. I particularly specialize with working with people who come from maybe religiously conservative backgrounds and are dealing with a lot of sexual shame, although by no means am I limited to that population, but that's definitely an area of expertise of mine. Many of you may not know that I myself am Mormon. I come from a Mormon background, and so that's my culture and my tribe and my heritage. And this has been a particularly difficult week for those in my Mormon community with allegations of sexual assault and of particular leaders, which, that's pretty common in any community. That in of itself is not necessarily, unfortunately, uncommon. I think what we are dealing with and grappling with as a church community is how the church system itself handles those types of situations when they come up. So I know that a lot of my listeners, not all of you, but some of my listeners come from that background as well. And I just wanted to mention this because I just wanted to let people know that I am feeling the wounds that we're all feeling in our community, and hopefully wanting to be part of the solutions that many communities have had to come up with. I mean, from the Catholic Church to I know many evangelical churches to lots of different communities that have had to learn how to better address issues that have to do with supporting victims of sexual assault within their system. So just a shout out that, I'm thinking of all of you in my community and sending you all love, and especially those of you who, sadly have experienced some of these things yourselves and some of the victim blaming that happens and just really kind of awful things that, I think leave people feeling like it's better to stay silent and it's better to stay protective instead of vulnerable and sharing of these things. And that we know is harmful to mental health and to sexual health. And so it's hard sometimes to find the safe spaces we need to sexually heal. So I'm starting off tonight on that somber note that has nothing to do with the topic that we're going to talk about tonight, but just thought I'd shout that out. As far as Sex Talk with Natasha, this is a space that I feel very, very strongly about. I have wanted to reach out and be able to do something that would be able to reach a wider audience for many years. Obviously, I have my private practice and individuals who are able to either afford or either money-wise or time-wise or energy-wise to come to see me or somebody like me. That's wonderful. But there are many people who can't necessarily afford those types of services. And I'm just a big proponent of sexual education, sexual positivity, and being able to heal and prioritize our sexual health as an integral part of our wellness plan. Many of us are into eating healthy or exercising or other, mindfulness or spirituality or other ways that we take care of ourselves. And sometimes sexuality has been broached from this topic, from this space of like, it's frivolous, it's not necessary, that's not really important, when everything we know about sexual health is actually that it's very important, and that it's important not just for us, but for children that we are raising, and communities and systems as far as the messages that we're sending. So that's what Sex Talk with Natasha is about. And without further ado, I'll pass the torch over to Ashley, who's the producer of the show and helps me manage all of these things that we try to put together for you to tell you a little bit more about what we're about.
Hello, everybody. So forgive the rocky camera, but we wanted to make sure that we get everybody the chance to watch as much as we can. Thank you for joining. For those that are new to Sex Talk with Natasha, this is a weekly show that we do. It's an hour long, and we really just try to help you guys as much as we can. Every week we bring on a guest and we have a specific topic. And today we're going to be talking about libido differences. So it's going to be great. And we've actually gotten several people that have asked about this specific question. So it's going to be really resourceful for a lot of people. The hour is broken down into 3 segments. The first hour, or the first third is Natasha's going to give us some education on the topic. And then the next third, we're going to bring our guest on. And then the last third of the hour, we'll go ahead and open it up to audience questions. So if anybody has questions, go ahead and send it to us. You can send it in a direct message. You can comment, whatever is best for you guys. And then the first half, we'll have it for free on Facebook, which is what you guys are watching, those that are watching on Facebook. And for those that want to see the whole episode, go ahead and become a subscriber at Patreon, patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. And there's a whole bunch of resources over there. So go check it out. Natasha's doing, what are you calling it, Natasha? Daily
actions to heal from sexual shame.
Yeah, really, really helpful. You guys should all go check it out. And then if anybody is interested in seeing Natasha professionally, you can check out her online practice, Symmetry Solutions, and you can see that at symmetrysouls.com. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it back over to Natasha, and we'll get started with our topic.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited because I'm trying to offer something on Symmetry Solutions like daily, like every day there's something, whether it's a daily action, a blog post, a Facebook Live event. So it's this, again, it's this idea of an interactive, ongoing journey. It's not a one weekend workshop that you go to that's supposedly going to heal everything in 3 days, which is super unrealistic, although I do throw those and they are helpful. They're not necessarily what you need to kind of consistently go to the sex gym per se, you know, and stretch your muscles and be consistently working out in this particular way that's going to help your life. All right, so the topic tonight, when women in a heterosexual relationship have a higher libido than their male partners, that's the topic. Now, this is not to say that gay, lesbian, bi, transgender folks wouldn't maybe find some of the concepts in this particular segment helpful, but I do just want to be very clear from the get-go that we're addressing heterosexual couples, because I know that when we don't do that, it's just so dismissive of the LGBT community. You know, when we just talk like this is going to be applicable to everyone, when that's really not the case. LGBTQ relationships have different dynamics oftentimes, and the research shows that there's differences in sexual dynamics, you know, that just happen within those types of populations. So this is primarily for heterosexual couples, but feel free to listen because I think a lot of the concepts can be helpful to anyone. All right, so one of the things that you may have noticed on my blog series lately is that I just finished kind of this series. It's called The Baggage, the baggage that we all come with into relationships. And there's several blog posts that are structured around the idea of gender roles. Gender roles are such a huge, huge part of how we are educated about who we are, our identity, our sexuality, our relationships, and they really do affect us all in oftentimes very limiting and negative ways. And a very strong, unfortunately resilient message that we've been doled out is that of males being the hypersexual person in a heterosexual relationship. So that men are typically portrayed as strong and muscular, virile, erect, sexually interested beings. In fact, so sexually interested that they're a little bit dangerous and you have to watch out for them. And by who needs to watch out for them, that's the rest of us, that's the women, right? And so it sets up this kind of like automatic battleground between the sexes, where instead of being lovers and partners, we're almost posited as enemies from the get-go. And there's this idea that men need to be either feared or managed. And of course, who gets to do managing? Women. So women are oftentimes portrayed as the weaker passive sex, waiting for the man to come along and either seduce you, awaken your sexuality, or horrifically, actually, take your virtue. These are all kind of words that are very much used in lots of different cultural settings that deal with talking about sexuality in indirect ways, but we all kind of know what they're talking about. And so a woman's sexuality is usually largely experienced through male desire and pleasure, and not necessarily from this place of personal ownership to begin with. Now, many of us, in 2018 may think that these scripts are completely outdated and silly, and yet I see them portrayed over and over again in our current movies, in our current advertisements, in books that we read, in literature, definitely in our religious settings, scripture, all of those types of things. You can find these themes that are very, very pervasive and that really set a foundation, an unfortunate foundation for expectations when you go into a relationship with a partner. So what do we do about this? I have 8 points tonight that will hopefully help you start thinking about this process differently. One is I just want you to recognize that we currently find ourselves in a sexual culture where the woman as the high libido partner is not considered the norm. So if you're in that situation, you might consider yourself different or weird or eccentric or whatever word you want to use. Now, research studies vary as far as how many women consider themselves a high libido partner, but the highest number I found was 60% of women in Britain are actually saying they want more sex than men. That's a fairly recent study. And we're breaking down some of the barriers about men being the person who wants more sex, although a lot of research studies show that it is the man who wants more sex. When you really look at the reasons why, they're not necessarily biological reasons, they're much more environmental reasons. In other words, women, often we don't know oftentimes how much environment plays a role when women haven't necessarily been coached or encouraged or even told that they're sexual creatures to begin with. So it's hard to separate in the research the biology versus the environment in these regards. So just know that you are not considered the norm if you find yourself in this situation. I'm sure this is not news for you. I'm sure this is part of why people come to me with these questions. But this goes into point number 2, because this is important, because although nobody likes being the higher libido partner and nobody likes being the lower libido partner, like both of those positions in a relationship are painful and come with a lot of challenges. It's harder when you have the scripts working against you. In other words, it's already hard to have a libido discrepancy, and now to not even be in the norm of libido discrepancies adds another layer of difficulty, where oftentimes I hear women coming in and feeling very either like hypersexual, there's something wrong with me, or I'm really not attractive or sexy because I can't even turn my man on who should be turned on by the wind, right? I mean, these are kind of the scripts that we hear. And the man will come in very emasculated, feeling very much like his role as a masculine partner he's not fulfilling because he's the lower libido partner. So there's an added level of distress that oftentimes I find when the woman is the higher libido partner. So my number 3 tip is to really stop the blame game, which is what you've been taught to do. So I'm not trying to say that people do this. It's not like people get up in the morning and say, "Ooh, I can't wait to ruin my partner's life, and be the lower libido partner or be the higher libido partner." I mean, people really are struggling with these things because these things come naturally. Sexual drive is a very natural thing. And if you have it, and if it's energized within you, that's a very natural way you want to express yourself. The same as if you don't have it. That's a natural thing that's happening. It's not like you woke up that morning and decided that you didn't want to be sexual. So you need to stop thinking about this from the perspective of either something's wrong with me or something's wrong with you. And Emily Nagoski, who wrote the book Come As You Are, although it's directed mostly towards women, I think is a fabulous read for anybody because she does such a fabulous job of normalizing sexual drive and desire and understanding arousal and how we, so many of these things are not necessarily in our control, where I can just say, oh, that matters to you? No problem. I'll just make sure that I change that tonight, you know, because it matters to you. It just isn't that easy. Okay, so tip number 4 is to not expect to get all of your sexual needs met through one partner. And this flies in the face of what I call the romantic script of Western culture, which is that, you know, I get together with my soulmate, and my soulmate is going to meet all of my sexual needs, and we're going to complete each other and be, you know, in this wonderful space where everything just falls into place because we're meant to be and we're meant for each other. So that script and that narrative oftentimes sets people up for really dramatic loss of expectations and sadness, and this idea that somehow we're not compatible, when really these are fairly normative things to be struggling with. So you have to kind of start thinking about, you know, there's really no other area in my life where I probably count on my partner to meet all of my needs. Hopefully most of our needs in this particular area are being met within our relationship, but how are we going to negotiate and contract other ways that this is going to happen as well? Now, so that moves into tip number 5, which is communication and contracting ways you're both comfortable having those needs met outside of your particular relationship. Now, this can be as simple as masturbation. It can be as complex as non-monogamy, you know, opening up your marriage. So there's lots and lots of things to explore in between kind of those two extremes. So this is an important place where communication is vital, and oftentimes where most people get stuck, because talking about our sex lives is so extremely difficult. Most of us don't know how to do it effectively. Most of us are horrified about either hurting our partner's feelings, or we've hurt our partner's feelings in the past and don't want to bring up those issues again, or we're embarrassed, or we're lacking in the language because none of us were offered those types of scripts or narratives growing up. It's not like we normally saw our parents or people around us manage these types of discussions. So we're feeling very inadequate in the communication piece, which is so important. My number 6 tip is to find different ways to count sexual success. And I did a blog post on this as well. You know, where oftentimes we're left with this idea that the only successful sexual encounter is when a penis is inserted into a vagina and both partners have an orgasm fairly, you know, simultaneously. Like, that's the ideal way that, for whatever reason, we have formulated sexual success. And this flies in the data of how actually women have pleasure, which involves, you know, high levels of clitoral stimulation, which usually penis vagina sex does not offer a lot of. And it also flies in the face of so many other parts of erotic touch and sensuality and pleasure, and things that we can be considering as successful sexual encounters. So we're really going to have to get creative about considering lots of different things sexually successful. And this includes what I would call lovey quickies, or gifts of love, where the lower libido partner says, you know what, I think, you know, I kind of get it that this is important. So I'm making myself available to you to have this sexual experience with me. And I'm not talking about the resentful, like, fine, take me now, or sure, because that can be very harmful actually for a partner to present themselves in that way. I'm talking about the genuine, like, yeah, I get it. This is important. And I don't mind, you know, I don't mind lying with you while you masturbate, or giving you a hand job, or, you know, letting you have a quickie with me. Like, that's fine. I can do that. Oftentimes higher libido partners see that as subpar, see that as not enough, because it doesn't feel organic, or like you really want to do this with me. And so even though that's a very positive thing that a lower libido partner is offering, oftentimes a high libido partner has hurt feelings or still doesn't see it as sufficient. So we need to have some conversations about how that actually is a very helpful tool if a lower libido partner has some of that energy to offer. Okay, number 7 tip would be getting really curious about why there's probably a lack of pleasure happening for a lower libido partner. So for high libido people, sexuality is pleasurable. That's why it's a drive. You look forward to it. You're excited about it. It's all about pleasure, stress relief. With a lower libido partner, that isn't happening. And oftentimes for higher libido partners, it's very hard to understand how anybody couldn't want the same benefits that they seem to get out of sexuality. And so getting really curious about your partner's position and why they're not as energized about this idea, or why the pleasure is lacking in this particular part of their lives, again, goes back to that communication point, but I think is an important point all of its own. And finally, the number 8 point is, I think that at some level, if you've tried many, many different things and you've communicated about different things and you've worked with a professional even, honesty is really important. And many, many times people will say, well, sex differences are not enough for a relationship to to be torn apart. Like, that's a silly reason to divorce, or that's a silly reason to break up. And although I never would want to come across as like, yeah, sure, if it's not working, get a divorce, no biggie, because divorce is a really big deal. I do think that at some level, it is something that people do need to put on the table if sexual incompatibility is something that is really getting in the way of the type of long-term relationship they want to have. And so it's kind of like a last resort. And hopefully after you've tried lots of different things that most people I've found are not always willing to try or work on. And yet I want to validate that oftentimes it can be a very reasonable reason why relationships don't end up working. Because when you think about long-term relationships and marriage and relationships where the expectation is that there's going to be some level of sexuality and maybe there isn't room for non-monogamy, then at some level, the pairing hasn't gone well. And that's a legitimate concern that I just want to validate. Okay, so that puts me at the end of my basic notes over the topic.